The state of our state is that New York is in crisis. We're facing a fiscal crisis, a public safety crisis, a population crisis. But most of all, we're facing a leadership crisis. The chief executive of this state, Governor Andrew Cuomo, has not just presided over New York's decline this past decade, he's the architect of it. By any objective measure, New York is in serious trouble. The state of our state requires a sense of urgency and action. This isn't the time to pull punches. New Yorkers need to hear it straight. They want the truth. Cuomo was right about one thing. New York is suffering and abused, but it's at the hands of our own state government. Our problems started long before COVID, and they aren't the fault of anyone else, including the federal government. They're the direct result of bad state policies. They're the direct result of a governor who is only consumed with his own power and publicity, while everything he touches is corrupted, mismanaged, or destroyed. COVID is perhaps the best example of the charade he's tried to perpetuate on New Yorkers. The governor deserves credit for knowing to put on a show. I mean, heck, he earned an Emmy for it. He was filtered into everyone's living rooms every day, talking about mama's meatballs, the boyfriend, movie night with his daughters. But for the other 23 hours a day when the bright lights of the cameras were off, Andrew Cuomo was mismanaging this virus. His deadly order that forced nursing homes to accept COVID-positive patients and prohibited testing, it led to the deaths of more than 12,000 elderly New Yorkers. He was the only governor in America who adopted that combination of deadly policies. We still don't even know the true number of deaths because he's engaged in a cover-up. His petty power struggle with New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio has created chaos, confusion, and frustration for all New Yorkers. His unemployment system was a colossal failure, taking months for some New Yorkers to register and to receive their first check. His arbitrary and punitive shutdowns have been ruled unconstitutional and have destroyed the livelihoods of low and middle income New Yorkers who were already struggling to make ends meet in the tax and regulatory hell that is the state of New York. He changes the rules to suit his whims without a care for how it impacts regular people's lives. Our small businesses were shut down while big box stores thrived. The governor called those essential. To this day, businesses like restaurants are shut down to indoor dining in many places in New York, despite a transmission rate of only 1.4% by his own math. That's lower than New York City's public schools, which the governor called the safest place to be. But in Cuomo's New York facts, they're applied very subjectively. And what's worse is that New Yorkers were dying and having their livelihoods and their futures stolen from them overnight. While that was going on, Cuomo was focused on making a crude, commemorative, self-congratulatory poster and writing his memoir. We have the worst death rate of any state in the nation. Nearly 39,000 New Yorkers have lost their lives, close to double that of Florida, which has a much greater population. There was light at the end of the tunnel, thanks to Operation Warp Speed and the response of the Trump administration that delivered the vaccine to New York in record time. But once again, mismanagement from the top is preventing it from getting into people's arms. New York lags behind 26 other states in getting the vaccine administered, and currently 66% of the doses are sitting on shelves in New York City. Medical providers were forced to throw out precious vaccines because they couldn't find eligible recipients that fit into Governor Cuomo's restrictive and complicated guidelines. That is a disgrace. The governor announced that drug addicts and sex offenders convicted in prison would have access to vaccinations before the NYPD or our elderly. The gross absurdity of it is it's almost too much to believe. But that's the truth that we live in as New Yorkers. More than a third of our small businesses are permanently closed. More than half of our restaurants are facing that same fate. New York's economic recovery has been one of the slowest in the nation, bogged down by our highest in the nation taxes, worst business climate, and most onerous regulations. New York's economy was on its knees before COVID, and now it's in a full-blown death spiral. We are facing a $59 billion shortfall. $59 billion. And the governor and the Democratic-controlled legislature's only path forward to address it is through higher taxes, sports betting, and the legalization of marijuana. That's not going to solve this crisis. New York doesn't have a revenue problem. We have a tax and spend problem. The only result raising taxes will have is sending more New Yorkers and jobs fleeing out of this state. Our population continues to decline more than any state in the nation. We are hemorrhaging people. We are hemorrhaging jobs. Goldman Sachs has added itself to the growing chorus of Wall Street firms moving out of New York. The financial services industry is critical to this state, not only for the good jobs they provide, but for the enormous tax revenues that they contribute. Another important industry, real estate, has been decimated, and the Democratic leaders that run New York have enacted extreme liberal policies that have trampled on property owners' rights. Our poor economic policies are compounded by the very dangerous destruction of our criminal justice system. New Yorkers have watched as violent career criminals. They're emboldened by a new revolving door system of justice and the elimination of cash bail, courtesy of Cuomo and New York Democrats. 2 decades of falling crime rates in New York City have been reversed and replaced by horrifying statistics. Murders are up 40%. Burglaries are up 41%, and shootings have doubled. Our brave men and women in law enforcement, they're demoralized, and they're dejected by anti-police rhetoric and policies that put them in handcuffs instead of the criminals. This past summer, we watched as cities across New York were being destroyed by rioters and looters. Out-of-control mobs were burning small businesses and stealing people's American dream. Yet cowardly Democrat politicians across the state, they remained silent. They were too intimidated to cross the radical left that they're held hostage to. Our law enforcement needed help, but Governor Cuomo refused to call in the National Guard and insulted them as simply being meal delivery men and women. Hardworking, law-abiding New Yorkers and crime victims got the loud and clear message that they are not the priority of this government. That must change. Common sense must make a comeback in the state of New York. Families at home make hard decisions every day about how to manage their budgets and their priorities. It's time for state government to start doing the same. What we do now will dictate what kind of state that we have left for the next generation. How can we help those less fortunate if we have no one left that actually pays the bills in this state? How can we create a safe community and help crime victims when we let their perpetrators right back out on the street? How can we help our immigrants and our young people realize their entrepreneurial dreams if we make it impossible to run a small business in this state? What kind of state do we want for our kids and our grandchildren? Those are the questions that every New Yorker must ask themselves. This governor has had 10 years in charge. He has a rubber stamp legislature who abdicated all of their power to him. And I call on those leaders. I call on those leaders to take back their power. Do your job. Speaker Hasty, Senate Leader Stuart Cousins, you were just sworn in and reelected to lead your chambers. They must start by fulfilling their constitutional duties and return New York to a representative democracy. We're not a monarchy. We are not a dictatorship. New Yorkers must have their voice heard through elected representatives. One person and one party rule has not served this state very well. New York Republicans have put forth an agenda that will revive our state. The recipe's not complicated. We need to tax less, let hardworking New York taxpayers keep more of their money. We need to repeal onerous regulations that act like a wet blanket on our ability to create and to grow jobs. We need to spend within our means and stop wasting your money. We need to send a message that if you violate someone's safety, there will be real consequences. We need to respect those who risk so much for our family safety. And most importantly, we need to return state government to the people. There is much angst in our country right now. We truly are at a pivotal moment. People have lost trust in our institutions, and they've been let down by those empowered with leading them. We're experiencing a trampling of our rights, a movement to suppress free speech and censorship at the highest levels by out-of-control big tech. Instead of working to bridge our divides, this governor has worked tirelessly to deepen them. He thrives on them because for him, it's a deflection tool to distract you from his failures. He needs New Yorkers to be angry and to be divided because uniting us will have devastating consequences for him in his career. And that's why he says things like, conservatives have no place in New York. Since the events that unfolded last Wednesday, he had the chance to rise to the moment, to change his tone, his rhetoric, and his partisanship. Instead, he and his taxpayer-funded staff have worked overtime, ginning it up, dividing us more. He's failed to deliver once again. New York used to be a symbol for hope that anything is possible. Now, unfortunately, we're a symbol of failed leadership, failed policies, and failed opportunities. We need a new dawn in this state, a new era that respects the tax-paying, law-abiding citizens of New York, that decentralizes power from Albany and puts it back into the hands of its rightful owners, the people. The key to our future is not an extreme ideological agenda. It's a return to simple common sense. We can rise up again. We can return New York to greatness, to be a state that attracts people and businesses, a state that embraces those who put it all on the line to fulfill their destiny. The phrase New York tough is thrown around a lot, and New Yorkers are tough. But instead of forcing them to be tough to endure the hardships that this state puts on them, let's lift those burdens and invest that energy into our state's future. The results would be transformative. I'm asking you to join our mission, to reject the status quo and to reject decline and demand better from those in power. We can, because we are Americans and we are New Yorkers. There is nothing we cannot do when we put our hearts and our minds together and fight for a better future. One nation, one state, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and God bless the people of the state of New York.